The Elementary Forms of the Religious Life by Émile Durkheim. Book number 2, The Elementary Beliefs. Part number 1, Totemic Beliefs. The totem as name and as emblem. Owing to its nature, our study will include 2 parts. Since every religion is made up of intellectual conceptions and ritual practices, we must deal successively with the beliefs and rites which compose the totemic religion. These 2 elements of the religious life are too closely connected with each other to allow of any radical separation. In principle, the cult is derived from the beliefs, yet it reacts upon them. The myth is frequently modeled after the rite in order to account for it, especially when its sense is no longer apparent. On the other hand, there are beliefs which are clearly manifested only through the rites which express them. So these 2 parts of our analysis cannot fail to overlap. However, these 2 orders of facts are so different that it is indispensable to study them separately. And since it is impossible to understand anything about a religion while unacquainted with the ideas upon which it rests, we must seek to become acquainted with these latter first of all. But it is not our intention to retrace all the speculations into which the religious thought, even of the Australians alone, has run. The things we wish to reach are the elementary notions at the basis of the religion, but there is no need of following them through all the development, sometimes very confused, which the mythological imagination of these peoples has given them. We shall make use of myths when they enable us to understand these fundamental ideas better, but we shall not make mythology itself the subject of our studies. In so far as this is a work of art, it does not fall within the jurisdiction of the simple science of religions. Also, the intellectual evolution from which it results is of too great a complexity to be studied indirectly and from a foreign point of view. It constitutes a very difficult problem which must be treated by itself, for itself, and with a method peculiar to itself. Among the beliefs upon which totemism rests, the most important are naturally those concerning the totem. It is with these that we must begin. At the basis of nearly all the Australian tribes we find a group which holds a preponderating place in the collective life. This is the clan. 2 essential traits characterize it. In the first place, the individuals who compose it consider themselves united by a bond of kinship, but one which is of a very special nature. This relationship does not come from the fact that they have definite blood connections with one another, they are relatives from the mere fact that they have the same name. They are not fathers and mothers, sons, or daughters, uncles or nephews of one another in the sense which we now give these words, yet they think of themselves as forming a single family, which is large or small according to the dimensions of the clan, merely because they are collectively designated by the same word. When we say that they regard themselves as a single family, we do so because they recognize duties towards each other which are identical with those which have always been incumbent upon kindred, such duties as aid, vengeance, mourning, the obligation not to marry among themselves, etc. By this first characteristic, the clan does not differ from the Roman gens or the Greek, for this relationship also came merely from the fact that all the members of the gens had the same name, the nomen gentilicium. And in one sense, the gens is a clan, but it is a variety which should not be confounded with the Australian clan. This latter is distinguished by the fact that its name is also the name of a determined species of material things with which it believes that it has very particular relations, the nature of which we shall presently describe. They are especially relations of kinship. The species of things which serves to designate the clan collectively is called its totem. The totem of the clan is also that of each of its members. Each clan has its totem, which belongs to it alone. Two different clans of the same tribe cannot have the same. In fact, one is a member of a clan merely because he has a certain name. All who bear this name are members of it for that very reason, in whatever manner they may be spread over the tribal territory. They all have the same relations of kinship with one another. Consequently, two groups having the same totem can only be two sections of the same clan. Undoubtedly, it frequently happens that all of a clan does not reside in the same locality, but has representatives in several different places. However, this lack of a geographical basis does not cause its unity to be the less keenly felt. In regard to the word totem, we may say that it is the one employed by the Ojibwe, an Algonquin tribe, to designate the sort of thing whose name the clan bears. Although this expression is not at all Australian, and is found only in one single society in America, ethnographers have definitely adopted it, and use it to denote, in a general way, the system which we are describing. Schoolcraft was the first to extend the meaning of the word thus and to speak of a totemic system. This extension, of which there are examples enough in ethnography, is not without inconveniences. It is not normal for an institution of this importance to bear a chance name, taken from a strictly local dialect, and bringing to mind none of the distinctive characteristics of the thing it designates. But today this way of employing the word is so universally accepted that it would be an excess of purism to rise against this usage. In a very large proportion of the cases, the objects which serve as totems belong either to the animal or the vegetable kingdom, but especially to the former. Inanimate things are much more rarely employed. Out of more than 500 totemic names collected by Howitt among the tribes of southeastern Australia, there are scarcely 40 which are not the names of plants or animals. These are the clouds, rain, hail, frost, the moon, the sun, the wind, the autumn, the summer, the winter, certain stars, thunder, fire, smoke, water, or the sea. It is noticeable how small a place is given to celestial bodies and, more generally, to the great cosmic phenomena, which were destined to so great a fortune in later religious development. Among all the clans of which Howitt speaks, there were only two which had the moon as totem, 2 the sun, 3 a star, 3 the thunder, 2 the lightning. The rain is a single exception. It, on the contrary, is very frequent. 109. These are the totems which can be spoken of as normal. But totemism has its abnormalities as well. It sometimes happens that the totem is not a whole object, but the part of an object. This fact appears rather rarely in Australia. Howitt cites only one example. However, it may well be that this is found with a certain frequency in the tribes where the totemic groups are excessively subdivided. It might be said that the totems had to break themselves up in order to be able to furnish names to these numerous divisions. This is what seems to have taken place among the Arunta and the Lauretia. Strello has collected 442 totems in these two societies, of which many are not an animal species, but some particular organ of the animal of the species, such as the tail or stomach of an opossum, the fat of the kangaroo, etc. We have seen that normally the totem is not an individual, but a species or a variety. It is not such and such a kangaroo or crow, but the kangaroo or crow in general. Sometimes, however, it is a particular object. First of all, this is necessarily the case when the thing serving as totem is unique in its class, as the sun, the moon, such or such a constellation, etc. It also happens that clans take their names from certain geographical irregularities or depressions of the land, from a certain anthill, etc. It is true that we have only a small number of examples of this in Australia, but Strello does mention some. But the very causes which have given rise to these abnormal totems show that they are of a relatively recent origin. In fact, what has made certain geographical features of the land become totems is that a mythical ancestor is supposed to have stopped there or to have performed some act of his legendary life there. But at the same time, these ancestors are represented in the myths as themselves belonging to clans which had perfectly regular totems, that is to say, ones taken from the animal or vegetable kingdoms. Therefore, the totemic names thus commemorating the acts and performances of these heroes cannot be primitive. They belong to a form of totemism that is already derived and deviated. It is even permissible to ask if the meteorological totems have not a similar origin, for the sun, the moon, and the stars are frequently identified with the ancestors of the mythological epoch. Sometimes, but no less exceptionally, it is an ancestor or a group of ancestors which serves as totem directly. In this case, the clan takes its name, not from a thing or a species of real things, but from a purely mythical being. Spencer and Gillen had already mentioned 2 or 3 totems of this sort. Among the Warramunga and among the Tjingili there are clans which bear the name of an ancestor named Thabala who seems to be gaiety incarnate. Another Warramunga clan bears the name of a huge fabulous serpent named Wal Unkwa, from which the clan considers itself descended. We owe other similar facts to Strello. In any case, it is easy enough to see what probably took place. Under the influence of diverse causes and by the very development of mythological thought, the collective and impersonal totem became effaced before certain mythical personages who advanced to the first rank and became totems themselves. Howsoever interesting these different irregularities may be, they contain nothing which forces us to modify our definition of a totem. They are not, as has sometimes been believed, different varieties of totems which are more or less irreducible into each other or into the normal totem, such as we have defined it. They are merely secondary and sometimes even aberrant forms of a single notion which is much more general, and there is every ground for believing it the more primitive. The manner in which the name is acquired is more important for the organization and recruiting of the clan than for religion. It belongs to the sociology of the family rather than to religious sociology. So we shall confine ourselves to indicating summarily the most essential principles which regulate the matter. In the different tribes, 3 different systems are in use. In a great number, or it might even be said, in the greater number of the societies, the child takes the totem of its mother, by right of birth. This is what happens among the Diri and the Urubuna of the centre of southern Australia, the Audiobook and the Gorndijkmara of Victoria, the Kamilaroi, the Wiradjuri, the Wanghiban, and the Yuwalai of New South Wales, and the Wakelbera, the Pitapita, and the Kernandaberry of Queensland, to mention only the most important names. In this case, owing to a law of exogamy, the mother is necessarily of a different totem from her husband, and on the other hand, as she lives in his community, the members of a single totem are necessarily dispersed in different localities according to the chances of their marriages. As a result, the totemic group lacks a territorial base. Elsewhere the totem is transmitted in the paternal line. In this case, if the child remains with his father, the local group is largely made up of people belonging to a single totem, only the married women there represent foreign totems. In other words, each locality has its particular totem. Up until recent times, this scheme of organization was found in Australia only among the tribes where totemism was in decadence, such as the Ngarrindjeri, where the totem has almost no religious character at all anymore. It was therefore possible to believe that there was a close connection between the totemic system and descent in the uterine line. But Spencer and Gillen have observed, in the northern part of Central Australia, a whole group of tribes where the totemic religion is still practiced but where the transmission of the totem is in the paternal line. These are the Warramunga, the Kwanji, the Umbia, the Binbinga, the Mara, and the Anula. Finally, a third combination is the one observed among the Arunta and Lauritjia. Here the totem of the child is not necessarily either that of the mother or that of the father, it is that of a mythical ancestor who came, by processes which the observers recount in different ways, and mysteriously fecundated the mother at the moment of conception. A special process makes it possible to learn which ancestor it was and to which totemic group he belonged. But since it was only chance which determined that this ancestor happened to be near the mother, rather than another, the totem of the child is thus found to depend finally upon fortuitous circumstances. Outside of and above the totems of clans there are totems of phratries which, though not differing from the former in nature, must nonetheless be distinguished from them. A phratry is a group of clans which are united to each other by particular bonds of fraternity. Ordinarily the Australian tribe is divided into 2 phratries between which the different clans are distributed. Of course there are some tribes where this organization has disappeared, but everything leads us to believe that it was once general. In any case, there are no tribes in Australia where the number of phratries is greater than 2. Now in nearly all the cases where the phratries have a name whose meaning has been established, This name is that of an animal, it would therefore seem that it is a totem. This has been well demonstrated in a recent work by A. Lang. Thus, among the Gorndijke, Victoria, the phratries are called krokich and kapuch. The former of the words designates the white cockatoo and the latter the black cockatoo. The same expressions are found again among the Buendik and the Audiobook. Among the Wurrunger, the names employed are Bunjil and Wang, which designate the eagle hawk and the crow. The words Mukwara and Kilpara are used for the same purpose in a large number of tribes of New South Wales, they designate the same birds. It is also the eagle hawk and the crow which have given their names to the two phratries of the Ngarigo and the Walgal. Among the Kuin Merbera, it is the white cockatoo and the crow. Many other examples might be cited. Thus we are led to regard the phratry as an ancient clan which has been dismembered. The actual clans are the product of this dismemberment, and the solidarity which unites them is a souvenir of their primitive unity. It is true that in certain tribes, the phratries no longer have special names, as it seems, in others where these names exist, their meaning is no longer known, even to the members. But there is nothing surprising in this. The phratries are certainly a primitive institution, for they are everywhere in a state of regression, their descendants the clans have passed to the first rank. So it is but natural that the names which they bore should have been effaced from memory little by little, when they were no longer understood, for they must belong to a very archaic language no longer in use. This is proved by the fact that in many cases where we know the animal whose name the phratry bears, the word designating this animal in the current language is very different from the one employed here. Between the totem of the phratry and the totems of the clans there exists a sort of relation of subordination. In fact, in principle each clan belongs to one and only one phratry. It is very exceptional that it has representatives in the other phratry. This is not met with at all except among certain central tribes, notably the Arunta, also even where, owing to disturbing influences, overlappings of this sort have taken place, the great part of the clan is included entirely within one or the other of the two groups of the tribe, only a small minority is to be found in the other one. As a rule then, the two phratries do not overlap each other, consequently, the list of totems which an individual may have is predetermined by the phratry to which he belongs. In other words, the phratry is like a species of which the clans are varieties. We shall presently see that this comparison is not purely metaphorical. In addition to the phratries and clans, another secondary group is frequently met with in Australian societies, which is not without a certain individuality. These are the matrimonial classes. By this name they designate certain subdivisions of the phratry, whose number varies with the tribe. There are sometimes 2 and sometimes 4 per phratry. Their recruiting and operation are regulated by the two following principles. In the first place, each generation in a phratry belongs to different clans from the immediately preceding one. Thus, when there are only 2 classes per phratry, they necessarily alternate with each other every generation. The children make up the class of which their parents are not members, but grandchildren are of the same class as their grandparents. Thus, among the Kamilaroi, the Kupothin phratry has two classes, Ipai and Kumbo, the Dilby phratry, two others which are called Muri and Kubai. As descent is in the uterine line, the child is in the phratry of its mother. If she is a Kupothin, the child will be one also. But if she is of the Ipai class, he will be a Kumbo. If the child is a girl, her children will again be in the Ipai class. Likewise, the children of the women of the Muri class will be in the Kubai class, and the children of the Kubai women will be Muri again. When there are 4 classes per phratry, instead of 2, the system is naturally more complex, but the principle is the same. The 4 classes form 2 couples of 2 classes each, and these 2 classes alternate with each other every generation in the manner just indicated. Secondly, the members of one class can in principle marry into only one of the classes of the other phratry. The Ipai must marry into the Kubai class and the Muri into the Kumbo class. It is because this organization profoundly affects matrimonial relations that we give the group the name of matrimonial class. Now it may be asked whether these classes do not sometimes have totems like the phratries and clans. This question is raised by the fact that in certain tribes of Queensland, each matrimonial class has dietetic restrictions that are peculiar to it. The individuals who compose it must abstain from eating the flesh of certain animals which the others may consume freely. Are these animals not totems? But dietetic restrictions are not the characteristic marks of totemism. The totem is a name first of all, and then, as we shall see, an emblem. Now in the societies of which we just spoke, there are no matrimonial classes which bear the name of an animal or plant, or which have an emblem. 124 Of course it is possible that these restrictions are indirectly derived from totemism. It might be supposed that the animals which these interdictions protect were once the totems of clans which have since disappeared, while the matrimonial classes remained. It is certain that they have a force of endurance which the clans do not have. Then these interdictions, deprived of their original field, may have spread themselves out over the entire class, since there were no other groups to which they could be attached. But it is clear that if this regulation was born of totemism, it represents only an enfeebled and denatured form of it. All that has been said of the totem in Australian societies is equally applicable to the Indian tribes of North America. The only difference is that among these latter, the totemic organization has a strictness of outline and a stability which are not found in Australia. The Australian clans are not only very numerous, but in a single tribe their number is almost unlimited. Observers cite some of them as examples, but without ever succeeding in giving us a complete list. This is because the list is never definitely terminated. The same process of dismemberment which broke up the original phratries and give birth to clans properly so-called still continues within these latter. As a result of this progressive crumbling, a clan frequently has only a very small effective force. In America, on the contrary, the totemic system has better defined forms. Although the tribes there are considerably larger on the average, the clans are less numerous. A single tribe rarely has more than a dozen of them, and frequently less. Each of them is therefore a much more important group. But above all, their number is fixed. They know their exact number, and they it tell to us. This difference is due to the superiority of their social economy. From the moment when these tribes were observed for the first time, the social groups were strongly attached to the soil, and consequently better able to resist the decentralizing forces which assailed them. At the same time, the society had too keen a sentiment of its unity to remain unconscious of itself and of the parts out of which it was composed. The example of America thus enables us to explain even better the organization at the base of the clans. We would take a mistaken view, if we judged this only on the present conditions in Australia. In fact, it is in a state of change and dissolution there, which is not at all normal. It is much rather the product of a degeneration which we see, due both to the natural decay of time and the disorganizing effect of the whites. To be sure, it is hardly probable that the Australian clans ever had the dimensions and solid structure of the American ones. But there must have been a time when the distance between them was less considerable than it is today, for the American societies would never have succeeded in making so solid a structure if the clans had always been of so fluid and inconsistent a nature. This greater stability has even enabled the archaic system of phratries to maintain itself in America with a clearness and a relief no longer to be found in Australia. We have just seen that in the latter continent the phratry is everywhere in a state of decadence. Very frequently it is nothing more than an anonymous group. When it has a name, this is either no longer understood, or in any case, it cannot mean a great deal to the native, since it is borrowed from a foreign language, or from one no longer spoken. Thus we have been able to infer the existence of totems for phratries only from a few survivals, which, for the most part, are so slightly marked that they have escaped the attention of many observers. In certain parts of America, on the contrary, this institution has retained its primitive importance. The tribes of the northwest coast, the Tlingit, and the Haida especially, have now attained a relatively advanced civilization, yet they are divided into two phratries which are subdivided into a certain number of clans, the phratries of the crow and the wolf among the Tlingit, of the eagle and the crow among the Haida. And this division is not merely nominal, it corresponds to an ever-existing state of tribal customs and is deeply marked with the tribal life. The moral distance separating the clans is very slight in comparison with that separating the phratries. The name of each is not a word whose sense is forgotten or only vaguely known, it is a totem in the full sense of the term. They have all its essential attributes, such as will be described below. Consequently, upon this point also, American tribes must not be neglected, for we can study the totems of phratries directly there, while Australia offers only obscure vestiges of them. But the totem is not merely a name, it is an emblem, a veritable coat of arms whose analogies with the arms of heraldry have often been remarked. In speaking of the Australians, Gray says, each family adopt an animal or vegetable as their crest and sign, and what Gray calls a family is incontestably a clan. Also Feason and Howitt-say, the Australian divisions show that the totem is, in the first place, the badge of a group. Schoolcraft says the same thing about the totems of the Indians of North America. The totem is in fact a design which corresponds to the heraldic emblems of civilized nations, and each person is authorized to bear it as a proof of the identity of the family to which it belongs. This is proved by the real etymology of the word, which is derived from totem, which means village or the residence of a family group. Thus when the Indians entered into relations with the Europeans and contracts were formed between them, it was with its totem that each clan sealed the treaties thus concluded. The nobles of the feudal period carved, engraved, and designed in every way their coats of arms upon the walls of their castles, their arms, and every sort of object that belonged to them. The blacks of Australia and the Indians of North America do the same thing with their totems. The Indians who accompanied Samuel Hearne painted their totems on their shields before going into battle. According to Charlevoix, in time of war, certain tribes of Indians had veritable ensigns, made of bits of bark fastened to the end of a pole, upon which the totems were represented. Among the Tlingit, when a conflict breaks out between two clans, the champions of the two hostile groups wear helmets over their heads, upon which are painted their respective totems. Among the Iroquois, they put the skin of the animal which serves as totem upon each wigwam, as a mark of the clan. According to another observer, the animal was stuffed and set up before the door. Among the Wyandot, each clan has its own ornaments and its distinctive paintings. Among the Omaha, and among the Sioux generally, the totem is painted on the tent. Wherever the society has become sedentary, where the tent is replaced by the house, and where the plastic arts are more fully developed, the totem is engraved upon the woodwork and upon the walls. This is what happens, for example, among the Haida, the Tsimshian, the Salish and the Tlingit. A very particular ornament of the house, among the Tlingit, says Krauss, is the totemic coat of arms. Animal forms, sometimes combined with human forms, are engraved upon the posts at the sides of the door of entry, which are as high as 15 yards. They are generally painted with very bright colors. However, these totemic decorations are not very numerous in the Tlingit village. They are found almost solely before the houses of the chiefs and rich men. They are much more frequent in the neighboring tribe of the Haida. Here there are always several for each house. With its many sculptured posts arising on every hand, sometimes to a great height, a Haida village gives the impression of a sacred city, all bristling with belfries or little minarets. Among the Salish, the totem is frequently represented upon the interior walls of the house. Elsewhere, it is found upon the canoes, the utensils of every sort and the funeral piles. The preceding examples are taken exclusively from the Indians of North America. This is because sculpture, engravings, and permanent figurations are not possible except where the technique of the plastic arts has reached a degree of perfection to which the Australian tribes have not yet attained. Consequently, the totemic representations of the sort which we just mentioned are rarer and less apparent in Australia than in America. However, cases of them are cited. Among the Warramunga, at the end of the burial ceremonies, the bones of the dead man are interred, after they have been dried and reduced to powder. Beside the place where they are deposited, a figure representing the totem is traced upon the ground. Among the Mara and the Anula, the body is placed in a piece of hollow wood decorated with designs characteristic of the totem. In New South Wales, Oxley found engravings upon the trees near the tomb where a native was buried, to which Brough Smith attributes a totemic character. The natives of the Upper Darling carve totemic images upon their shields. According to Collins, nearly all the utensils are covered with ornaments which probably have the same significance. Figures of the same sort are found upon the rocks. These totemic designs may even be more frequent than it seems, for, owing to reasons which will be discussed below, it is not always easy to see what their real meaning is. These different facts give us an idea of the considerable place held by the totem in the social life of the primitives. However, up to the present, it has appeared to us as something relatively outside of the man, for it is only upon external things that we have seen it represented. But totemic images are not placed only upon the walls of their houses, the sides of their canoes, their arms, their utensils and their tombs. They are also found on the bodies of the men. They do not put their coat of arms merely upon the things which they possess, but they put it upon their persons, they imprint it upon their flesh, it becomes a part of them, and this world of representations is even by far the more important one. In fact, it is a very general rule that the members of each clan seek to give themselves the external aspect of their totem. At certain religious festivals among the Tlingit, the person who is to direct the ceremonies wears a garment which represents, either wholly or in part, the body of the animal whose name he bears. These same usages are also found in all the northwest of America. They are found again among the Minatari, when they go into combat, and among the Indians of the Pueblos. Elsewhere, when the totem is a bird, men wear the feathers of this bird on their heads. Among the Iowa, each clan has a special fashion of cutting the hair. In the Eagle clan, 2 large tufts are arranged on the front of the head, while there is another one behind. In the Buffalo clan, they are arranged in the form of horns. Among the Omaha, analogous arrangements are found. Each clan has its own headdress. In the Turtle clan, for example, the hair is all shaved off, except 6 bunches, 2 on each side of the head, 1 in front, and 1 behind, in such a way as to imitate the legs, the head and the tail of the animal. But it is more frequently upon the body itself that the totemic mark is stamped, for this is a way of representation within the capacity of even the least advanced societies. It has sometimes been asked whether the common rite of knocking out a young man's 2 upper teeth at the age of puberty does not have the object of reproducing the form of the totem. The fact is not established, but it is worth mentioning that the natives themselves sometimes explain the custom thus. For example, among the Arunta, the extraction of teeth is practiced only in the clans of the Rain and of Water. Now, according to tradition, The object of this operation is to make their faces look like certain black clouds with light borders which are believed to announce the speedy arrival of rain, and which are therefore considered things of the same family. This is a proof that the native himself is conscious that the object of these deformations is to give him, at least conventionally, the aspect of his totem. Among these same Arunta, in the course of the rites of sub-incision, certain gashes are cut upon the sisters and the future wife of the novice. Scars result from these, whose form is also represented upon a certain sacred object of which we shall speak presently and which is called the chewinga. As we shall see, the lines thus drawn upon the chewinga are emblematic of the totem. Among the Kaddish, the euro is believed to be closely connected with the rain. The men of the Rain clan wear little earrings made of euro teeth. Among the Yurkla, during the initiation the young man is given a certain number of slashes which leave scars. The number and form of these varies with the totems. An informer of Fezzan mentions the same fact in the tribes observed by him. According to Howitt, a relationship of the same sort exists among the Diri between certain arrangements of scars and the water totem. Among the Indians of the Northwest, it is a very general custom for them to tattoo themselves with the totem. 130. But even if the tattooings which are made by mutilations or scars do not always have a totemic significance, it is different with simple designs drawn upon the body. They are generally representations of the totem. It is true that the native does not carry them every day. When he is occupied with purely economic occupations, or when the small family groups scatter to hunt or fish, he does not bother with all this paraphernalia, which is quite complicated. But when the clans unite to live a common life and to assist at the religious ceremonies together, then he must adorn himself. As we shall see, each of the ceremonies concerns a particular totem, and in theory the rites which are connected with a totem can be performed only by the men of that totem. Now those who perform 131 who take the part of officiants, and sometimes even those who assist as spectators, always have designs representing the totem on their bodies. 132 One of the principal rites of initiation, by which a young man enters into the religious life of the tribe, consists in painting the totemic symbol on his body. 133 It is true that among the Arunta the design thus traced does not always and necessarily represent the totem of the initiated, but these are exceptions, due undoubtedly to the disturbed state of the totemic organization of this tribe. 134 Also, even among the Arunta, at the most solemn moment of the initiation, which is its crown and consecration, when the neophyte is allowed to enter the sanctuary where all the sacred objects belonging to the clan are preserved, an emblematic painting is placed upon him. This time, it is the totem of the young man which is thus represented. The bonds which unite the individual to his totem are even so strong that in the tribes on the northwest coast of North America, the emblem of the clan is painted not only upon the living but also upon the dead. Before a corpse is interred, they put the totemic mark upon it. These totemic decorations enable us to see that the totem is not merely a name and an emblem. It is in the course of the religious ceremonies that they are employed. They are a part of the liturgy, so while the totem is a collective label, it also has a religious character. In fact, it is in connection with it, that things are classified as sacred or profane. It is the very type of sacred thing. The tribes of Central Australia, especially the Arunta, the Lauritgia, the Kadish, the Unmajara, and the Ilpura, make constant use of certain instruments in their rites which are called the Chillinga by the Arunta, according to Spencer and Gillen, or the Tijarunga, according to Strello. They are pieces of wood or bits of polished stone, of a great variety of forms, but generally oval or oblong. Each totemic group has a more or less important collection of these. Upon each of these is engraved a design representing the totem of this same group. A certain number of the Chillinga have a hole at one end, through which goes a thread made of human hair or that of an opossum. Those which are made of wood and are pierced in this way serve for exactly the same purposes as those instruments of the cult to which English ethnographers have given the name of bull roarers. By means of the thread by which they are suspended, they are whirled rapidly in the air in such a way as to produce a sort of humming identical with that made by the toys of this name still used by our children. This deafening noise has a ritual significance and accompanies all ceremonies of any importance. These sorts of Chillinga are real bull roarers. But there are others which are not made of wood and are not pierced, consequently they cannot be employed in this way. Nevertheless, they inspire the same religious sentiments. In fact, every Chillinga, for whatever purpose it may be employed, is counted among the eminently sacred things. There are none which surpass it in religious dignity. This is indicated even by the word which is used to designate them. It is not only a substantive but also an adjective meaning sacred. Also, among the several names which each Arunta has, there is one so sacred that it must not be revealed to a stranger. It is pronounced but rarely, and then in a low voice and a sort of mysterious murmur. Now this name is called the Aratna Chillinga. Aratna means name. In general, the word Chillinga is used to designate all ritual acts. For example, Ilya Chillinga signifies the cult of the emu. Chillinga, when used substantively, therefore designates the thing whose essential characteristic is sacredness. Profane persons, that is to say, women and young men not yet initiated into the religious life, may not touch or even see the Chillinga. They are only allowed to look at it from a distance, and even this is only on rare occasions. The Chillinga are piously kept in a special place, which the Arunta call the Ertne Chilunga. This is a cave or a sort of cavern hidden in a deserted place. The entrance is carefully closed by means of stones so cleverly placed that a stranger going past it could not suspect that the religious treasury of the clan was so near to him. The sacred character of the Chillinga is so great that it communicates itself to the locality where they are stored. The women and the uninitiated cannot approach it. It is only after their initiation is completely finished that the young men have access to it. There are some who are not esteemed worthy of this favor except after years of trial. The religious nature radiates to a distance and communicates itself to all the surroundings. Everything nearby participates in this same nature and is therefore withdrawn from profane touch. Is one man pursued by another? If he succeeds in reaching the Erdnachulunga, he is saved, he cannot be seized there. Even a wounded animal which takes refuge there must be respected. Quarrels are forbidden there. It is a place of peace, as is said in the Germanic societies. It is a sanctuary of the totemic group, it is a veritable place of asylum. But the virtues of the Chewinga are not manifested merely by the way in which it keeps the profane at a distance. If it is thus isolated, it is because it is something of a high religious value whose loss would injure the group and the individual severely. It has all sorts of marvelous properties. By contact it heals wounds, especially those resulting from circumcision. It has the same power over sickness, it is useful for making the beard grow, it confers important powers over the totemic species, whose normal reproduction it ensures, it gives men force, courage, and perseverance, while, on the other hand, it depresses and weakens their enemies. This latter belief is so firmly rooted that when two combatants stand pitted against one another, if one sees that the other has brought Chewinga against him, he loses confidence and his defeat is certain. Thus there is no ritual instrument which has a more important place in the religious ceremonies. By means of various sorts of anointings, their powers are communicated either to the officiants or to the assistants. To bring this about, they are rubbed over the members and stomach of the faithful after being covered with grease, or sometimes they are covered with a down which flies away and scatters itself in every direction when they are whirled, this a way of disseminating the virtues which are in them. But they are not useful merely to individuals, the fate of the clan as a whole is bound up with theirs. Their loss is a disaster, it is the greatest misfortune which can happen to the group. Sometimes they leave the Erdnachulunga, for example when they are loaned to other groups. Then follows a veritable public mourning. For 2 weeks, the people of the totem weep and lament, covering their bodies with white clay just as they do when they have lost a relative. And the Chewinga are not left at the free disposition of everybody. The Erdnachulunga where they are kept is placed under the control of the chief of the group. It is true that each individual has special rights to some of them, yet, though he is their proprietor in a sense, he cannot make use of them except with the consent and under the direction of the chief. It is a collective treasury, it is the sacred ark of the clan. The devotion of which they are the object shows the high price that is attached to them. The respect with which they are handled is shown by the solemnity of the movements. They are taken care of, they are greased, rubbed, polished, and when they are moved from one locality to another, it is in the midst of ceremonies which bear witness to the fact that this displacement is regarded as an act of the highest importance. Now in themselves, the Chewinga are objects of wood and stone like all others. They are distinguished from profane things of the same sort by only one particularity, this is that the totemic mark is drawn or engraved upon them. So it is this mark and this alone which gives them their sacred character. It is true that according to Spencer and Gillen, the Chewinga serve as the residence of an ancestor's soul and that it is the presence of this soul which confers these properties. While declaring this interpretation inexact, Strello, in his turn, proposes another which does not differ materially from the other. he claims that the chewinga are considered the image of the ancestor's body, or the body itself. So, in any case, it would be sentiments inspired by the ancestor which fix themselves upon the material object, and convert it into a sort of fetish. But in the first place, both conceptions which, by the way, scarcely differ except in the letter of the myth have obviously been made up afterwards, to account for the sacred character of the chewinga. In the constitution of these pieces of wood and bits of stone, and in their external appearance, there is nothing which predestines them to be considered the seat of an ancestral soul, or the image of his body. So if men have imagined this myth, it was in order to explain the religious respect which these things inspired in them, and the respect was not determined by the myth. This explanation, like so many mythological explanations, resolves the question only by repeating it in slightly different terms, for saying that the chewinga is sacred and saying that it has such and such a relation with a sacred being, is merely to proclaim the same fact in two different ways, it is not accounting for them. Moreover, according to the avowal of Spencer and Gillen, there are some chewinga among the Arunta which are made by the old men of the group, to the knowledge of and before the eyes of all. These obviously do not come from the great ancestors. However, except for certain differences of degree, they have the same power as the others and are preserved in the same manner. Finally, there are whole tribes where the chewinga is never associated with a spirit. Its religious nature comes to it, then, from some other source, and whence could it come, if not from the totemic stamp which it bears? It is to this image, therefore, that the demonstrations of the rite are really addressed. It is this which sanctifies the object upon which it is carved. Among the Arunta and the neighboring tribes, there are two other liturgical instruments closely connected with the totem and the chewinga itself, which ordinarily enters into their composition. They are the nurtunja and the waning ga. The nurtunja, which is found among the northern Arunta and their immediate neighbors, is made up principally of a vertical support which is either a single lance, or several lances united into a bundle, or of a simple pole. Bunches of grass are fastened all around it by means of belts or little cords made of hair. Above this, down is placed, arranged either in circles or in parallel lines which run from the top to the bottom of the support. The top is decorated with the plumes of an eagle hawk. This is only the most general and typical form. In particular cases, it has all sorts of variations. The waning ga, which is found only among the southern Arunta, the Urubana, and the Lorigia, has no one unique model either. Reduced to its most essential elements, it too consists in a vertical support, formed by a long stick or by a lance several yards high, with sometimes one and sometimes two cross pieces. 153 In the former case, it has the appearance of a cross. Cords made either of human hair or opossum or bandicoot fur diagonally cross the space included between the arms of the cross and the extremities of the central axis. As they are quite close to each other, they form a network in the form of a lozenge. When there are two crossbars, these cords go from one to the other and from these to the top and bottom of the support. They are sometimes covered with a layer of down, thick enough to conceal the foundation. Thus the waning ga has the appearance of a veritable flag. Now the nirtunja and the waning ga, which figure in a multitude of important rites, are the object of a religious respect quite like that inspired by the Ch'inga. The process of their manufacture and erection is conducted with the greatest solemnity. Fixed in the earth, or carried by an officiant, they mark the central point of the ceremony. It is about them that the dances take place and the rites are performed. In the course of the initiation, the novice is led to the foot of a nirtunja erected for the occasion. Someone says to him, "There is the nirtunja of your father, many young men have already been made by it." After that, the initiate must kiss the nirtunja. By this kiss, he enters into relations with the religious principle which resides there. It is a veritable communion which should give the young man the force required to support the terrible operation of subincision. The nirtunja also plays a considerable role in the mythology of these societies. The myths relate that in the fabulous times of the great ancestors, the territory of the tribe was overrun in every direction by companies composed exclusively of individuals of the same totem. Each of these troops had a nirtunja with it. When it stopped to camp, before scattering to hunt, the members fixed their nirtunja in the ground, from the top of which their ch'inga was suspended. That is equivalent to saying that they confided the most precious things they had to it. It was at the same time a sort of standard which served as a rallying center for the group. One cannot fail to be struck by the analogies between the nirtunja and the sacred post of the Omaha. Now its sacred character can come from only one cause, that is that it represents the totem materially. The vertical lines or rings of down which cover it, and even the cords of different colors which fasten the arms of the waning ga to the central axis, are not arranged arbitrarily, according to the taste of the makers. They must conform to a type strictly determined by tradition which, in the minds of the natives, represents the totem. Here we cannot ask, as we did in the case of the ch'inga, whether the veneration accorded to this instrument of the cult is not merely the reflex of that inspired by the ancestors, for it is a rule that each nirtunja and each waning ga last only during the ceremony where they are used. They are made all over again every time that it is necessary, and when the rite is once accomplished, they are stripped of their ornaments and the elements out of which they are made are scattered. They are nothing more than images and temporary images at that of the totem, and consequently it is on this ground, and on this ground alone, that they play a religious role. So the ch'inga, the nirtunja, and the waning ga owe their religious nature solely to the fact that they bear the totemic emblem. It is the emblem that is sacred. It keeps this character, no matter where it may be represented. Sometimes it is painted upon rocks. These paintings are called ch'inga ilkinia, sacred drawings. The decorations with which the officiants and assistants at the religious ceremonies adorn themselves have the same name. Women and children may not see them. In the course of certain rites, the totem is drawn upon the ground. The way in which this is done bears witness to the sentiments inspired by this design, and the high value attributed to it. It is traced upon a place that has been previously sprinkled, and saturated with human blood, and we shall presently see that the blood is in itself a sacred liquid, serving for pious uses only. When the design has been made, the faithful remain seated on the ground before it, in an attitude of the purest devotion. If we give the word a sense corresponding to the mentality of the primitive, we may say that they adore it. This enables us to understand how the totemic blazon has remained something very precious for the Indians of North America. It is always surrounded with a sort of religious halo. But if we are seeking to understand how it comes that these totemic representations are so sacred, it is not without interest to see what they consist in. Among the Indians of North America, they are painted, engraved, or carved images which attempt to reproduce as faithfully as possible the external aspect of the totemic animal. The means employed are those which we use today in similar circumstances, except that they are generally cruder. But it is not the same in Australia, and it is in the Australian societies that we must seek the origin of these representations. Although the Australian may show himself sufficiently capable of imitating the forms of things in a rudimentary way, sacred representations generally seem to show no ambitions in this line. They consist essentially in geometrical designs drawn upon the chewinga, the nurtunga, rocks, the ground, or the human body. They are either straight or curved lines, painted in different ways, and the whole having only a conventional meaning. The connection between the figure and the thing represented is so remote and indirect that it cannot be seen, except when it is pointed out. Only the members of the clan can say what meaning is attached to such and such combinations of lines. Men and women are generally represented by semicircles, and animals by whole circles or spirals, the tracks of men or animals by lines of points, etc. The meaning of the figures thus obtained is so arbitrary that a single design may have two different meanings for the men of two different totems, representing one animal here, and another animal or plant there. This is perhaps still more apparent with the nurtunja and waninga. Each of them represents a different totem. But the few and simple elements which enter into their composition do not allow a great variety of combinations. The result is that two nurtunja may have exactly the same appearance, and yet express two things as different as a gum tree and an emu. When a nurtunja is made, it is given a meaning which it keeps during the whole ceremony, but which, in the last resort, is fixed by convention. These facts prove that if the Australian is so strongly inclined to represent his totem, it is in order not to have a portrait of it before his eyes which would constantly renew the sensation of it. It is merely because he feels the need of representing the idea which he forms of it by means of material and external signs, no matter what these signs may be. We are not yet ready to attempt to understand what has thus caused the primitive to write his idea of his totem upon his person and upon different objects, but it is important to state at once the nature of the need which has given rise to these numerous representations.